Desert Night Storm. Tallulah Tallyboon had spent years trying to forget Jesse Coulter, the gunslinger who stole her heart and vanished. But when he rode into town, dust-covered and staring straight at her, she knew she was out of time. He leaned against the bar, his voice a slow drawl. "Still mad at me, darlin'?" he murmured. "Or just mad that you never stopped waitin'?" Chapter 1. The ghost of yesterday rides in. The dust swirled around his boots, a miniature desert storm kicked up by the arrival of a stranger. It was a common enough sight in Redemption, Arizona, a town clinging to life on the edge of nowhere, where men and women came looking for second chances, or to disappear altogether. But this stranger, this one, sent a shiver down Tallulah Tallyboon's spine, a cold dread that had nothing to do with the oppressive midday heat. She'd been wiping down the counter of her diner, the rhythmic motion a familiar comfort, the scent of pine cleaner and old wood a constant in her life. The lunch rush was over, the usual clatter of cutlery and boisterous conversation replaced by the quiet hum of the ceiling fan struggling against the heat. Outside, the sun beat down on the dusty main street, turning the world a shimmering, hazy white. Tally paused, her hand stilling on the worn wood. She hadn't seen him yet, not clearly, but she felt him. It was a prickling at the back of her neck, a tightening in her chest, a feeling she'd buried so deep she'd almost convinced herself it was a phantom pain. 15 years. 15 years since Jesse Coulter had ridden out of her life, leaving her with a shattered heart and a promise whispered on the wind that had turned to dust. She forced herself to look up, her gaze drawn to the figure silhouetted in the doorway. The light behind him made it impossible to see his face, but the shape of him was unmistakable. Tall, lean, the way he wore his hat low over his eyes, the gun belt slung low on his hips, it was Jesse. Time and distance hadn't dulled the sharp edges of his memory. He stepped inside, the spurs on his boots jingling softly, a sound that echoed the frantic beat of Tally's heart. The scent of leather, horses, and gunpowder followed him, a potent mix that transported her back to a time she'd tried so hard to forget. A time of stolen kisses under a vast, starlit sky, of whispered promises and reckless dreams. A time before the betrayal. The few remaining patrons in the diner, old Jedediah, nursing his usual cup of coffee, and a well-worn copy of the local Gazette, Mrs. Henderson, picking at a slice of apple pie, and young Billy, the stable boy, wide-eyed and curious, all fell silent, their attention fixed on the newcomer. Jesse moved with a slow, deliberate grace, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on her. And then the years melted away. The harsh lines etched around his eyes, the weathered skin, the silver threading through his dark hair, they were new, but the intensity of his gaze, the way his lips curved into a slow, knowing smile, that was the Jesse she remembered. The Jesse who had haunted her dreams and fueled her nightmares. He stopped at the counter, leaning against it with an easy familiarity that made her hands clench. The wood creaked under his weight, a small sound in the sudden, suffocating silence. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, held hers captive. They were older, harder, but there was a flicker of something else there, too. Something that made her breath catch in her throat. Regret? Longing? She couldn't be sure. She wouldn't let herself be sure. "Still mad at me, darlin'?" he murmured, his voice a low drawl that sent a shiver down her spine, a different kind of shiver this time, one that wasn't entirely unpleasant. It was the voice of her past, the voice of her dreams, the voice of the man who had broken her heart and then vanished like smoke. Tally straightened her shoulders, forcing herself to meet his gaze. She'd spent years building walls around her heart, brick by brick, forging a life for herself in this dusty, forgotten town. She was no longer the naive young woman he'd left behind. She was Tallulah Boone, owner of the best damn diner in Redemption, a woman who answered to no one. "Jesse Coulter," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I'd heard you were dead." She hadn't, not really, but the words felt like a necessary defense, a shield against the emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. Rumors, whispers on the wind, that's all he'd been for 15 years. A ghost. He chuckled, a low rumble in his chest. "Rumors tend to exaggerate, darlin'. especially about men like me. Men who ride out without a word? She retorted, the bitterness she'd tried to suppress bubbling to the surface. His smile faded, replaced by a shadow of something that looked like pain. That ain't how I remember it, Tally. Then your memory's faulty, she snapped, turning away to grab a clean glass and a bottle of whiskey from the shelf behind the counter. She poured him a generous shot, the amber liquid sloshing slightly as her hand trembled. She placed the glass in front of him, her fingers deliberately avoiding his. Maybe, he conceded, his voice softer now, almost a whisper. Or maybe there's more to the story than you know. She scoffed, a harsh, humorless sound. There's always more to the story, Jessie. That's the problem, isn't it? He picked up the glass, swirling the whiskey thoughtfully. I came back, Tally. That's gotta count for something.
Why?
She asked, the question sharp and laced with suspicion. Why now, after all this time? He took a long swallow of the whiskey, his eyes never leaving hers. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, filled with unspoken words, with years of hurt and unanswered questions. The ceiling fan whirred, a monotonous drone in the background. Outside, a dog barked, a lonely sound in the vast emptiness of the desert. Finally, he set the glass down, the sharp click echoing in the quiet room. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper meant only for her. Because I need your help, darlin', and you're the only one I can trust. He said it with a rugged determination, his hand subtly resting on his holstered pistol. The gesture, small as it might be, did nothing to calm her nerves. If anything, it sent fresh waves of unease rolling across her. She'd survived this long with a careful routine, where she knew who she was and her place within it. Chapter 2. Shadows in the desert sun. Tally stared at him, her mind reeling. Help? From her? The idea was ludicrous, bordering on insane. Jesse Coulter, the notorious outlaw, the man who'd lived on the fringes of the law for as long as she'd known him, needed her help? It was a cruel joke, a twisted twist of fate designed to torment her. Help with what, Jessie? She asked, her voice tight with disbelief. Robbing another stagecoach? Rustling more cattle? Or perhaps you need a place to hide from the law. He didn't flinch at her accusations, his gaze steady and unwavering. None of those things, Tally. This is different. Different how? She pressed, her eyes narrowed in suspicion. She knew him. Or at least, she thought she knew him. The Jesse she remembered was reckless, charming, and utterly untrustworthy. He was a whirlwind of danger and excitement, a man who lived by his own rules, consequences be damned. He hesitated, his gaze shifting away from hers for the first time since he'd walked into the diner. He looked out the window, at the shimmering heat rising from the dusty street, at the endless expanse of desert beyond. It was as if he were searching for the right words, or perhaps the courage to speak them. It's about my brother, Samuel, he finally said, his voice low and strained. Samuel. The name sent a jolt of surprise through Tally. Samuel Coulter was the opposite of Jesse in every way. Quiet, gentle, and law-abiding, Samuel had been the anchor of the Coulter family, the steady hand that tried to keep Jesse on the straight and narrow. He'd also been a good friend to Tally, a kind and comforting presence in the tumultuous years of her youth. What about Samuel? She asked, her voice softening slightly. He's in trouble, Tally. Big trouble. He's been accused of murder. The word hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Murder. Samuel? It was impossible. She'd known Samuel Coulter her entire life. He was incapable of such a thing. He was a rancher, a family man, a pillar of the community. He wouldn't hurt a fly, let alone take a life. That's a lie, she said, her voice filled with conviction. Samuel would never. I know, Jesse interrupted, his voice raw with desperation. But they have evidence. Witnesses. They're going to hang him, Tally. Unless I can prove his innocence. The image of Samuel, his kind eyes and gentle smile, flashed through her mind. The thought of him facing the gallows, of his life being cut short by a false accusation, it was unbearable. Who did they say he killed? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Sheriff Brody, Jesse replied, his jaw clenched tight. Sheriff Brody. The name sent a chill down Tally's spine. Brody was a hard man, a ruthless lawman who ruled redemption with an iron fist. He was known for his quick temper and his even quicker draw. He was also known for his corruption, for taking bribes and turning a blind eye to the crimes of those who could afford his price. Brody was crooked as a snake, Tally muttered, more to herself than to Jesse. He had enemies everywhere. I know, Jesse said, his voice grim. But Samuel was the one who found his body. He was the one who had the most to lose. Tally frowned, her mind racing. What did Samuel have to lose? Jesse hesitated again, his eyes searching hers. Brody was threatening to take his ranch. Said he had evidence that Samuel was involved in something illegal. Something that would ruin him. What kind of evidence? Tally asked, her suspicion growing. Jesse shook his head. I don't know. Samuel wouldn't tell me. He said he was protecting someone. Protecting his family. He looked away, clearly torn by old demons. Protecting someone. The words echoed in Tally's mind. Samuel had always been fiercely protective of his family, of his wife, Sarah, and their 2 young children. He would do anything for them. But what could he have been involved in that was so dangerous, so incriminating, that it would lead to his death? She looked at Jesse, at the desperation in his eyes, at the lines of worry etched on his face. He was a changed man, she could see that. The years had hardened him, but they hadn't erased the love he felt for his brother. He was here, asking for her help, because he had nowhere else to turn. And despite everything, despite the hurt and the betrayal, she couldn't turn him away. She couldn't stand by and watch Samuel hang for a crime she knew he didn't commit. She owed him that much. She owed them that much. What do you need me to do? She asked, her voice resigned. A flicker of hope sparked in Jesse's eyes. I need you to talk to people. Find out what Brody was up to. Who he was threatening. Who might have wanted him dead. And why me? She asked, still skeptical. You're the outlaw, Jesse. You're the one who knows how to navigate the shadows. He smiled, a sad, wistful smile. Because you're Tallulah Boone, darlin'. You're the heart of this town. People trust you. They talk to you. They tell you things they wouldn't tell anyone else. His words were a balm to her wounded pride, a recognition of the life she'd built for herself, of the respect she'd earned. But they were also a burden, a responsibility she wasn't sure she wanted to shoulder. And what if I find out something you don't want to hear? She asked, her voice challenging. He met her gaze, his eyes dark and serious. Then we'll deal with it. Together. Together. The word hung between them, a fragile promise in the face of overwhelming odds. It was a dangerous word, a word that could rekindle old feelings, old wounds. But it was also a word that offered a glimmer of hope, a chance for redemption, for both of them. She was no longer the lovesick girl, and he was no longer the same gunslinger. But the pull remained, simmering in the dusty, sun-drenched air. Chapter 3. A bargain struck in whispers. The diner felt different now, the air thick with unspoken agreements and the weight of a past that refused to stay buried. Jedediah had long since finished his coffee and shuffled out. Mrs. Henderson had paid for her pie and departed with a curious glance, and Billy, after a lingering, star-struck gaze at Jesse, had finally returned to the stables. Tally and Jesse were alone, the silence punctuated only by the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner, a constant reminder of the time slipping away, of Samuel's life hanging in the balance. Together, Tally repeated, the word tasting like ash and honey on her tongue. That's a big promise, Jesse. Especially considering our history. He nodded, his gaze unwavering. I know. But I'm not the same man I was 15 years ago, Tally. I've made mistakes, plenty of them. But I'm asking you to trust me now. Trust me to do right by Samuel. Trust. It was a fragile thing, easily broken, almost impossible to repair. Could she trust him? Could she trust the man who had ridden out of her life without a backward glance, leaving her to pick up the pieces of her shattered heart? She searched his eyes, looking for any sign of deception, any hint of the reckless, untamed spirit she remembered. She saw weariness there, and regret, but also a fierce determination, a desperate plea for help. And beneath it all, a flicker of something she hadn't seen in years: vulnerability. It was that vulnerability, that chink in his armor, that finally swayed her. "All right, Jessie," she said, her voice low and steady. "I'll help you, but on my terms." He raised an eyebrow, a hint of his old cockiness returning. "And what are those terms, darlin'?" "First," she said, ticking off the points on her fingers, "you tell me everything. No more secrets, no more half-truths. I need to know exactly what Samuel was involved in, who he was protecting, and why Brody was threatening him." He hesitated, his jaw clenching. "Some of that it's not pretty, Tally. It might change the way you see Samuel." "I'm a grown woman, Jessie," she retorted. "I can handle the truth. And Samuel was my friend. I deserve to know." He nodded slowly, his gaze dropping to the counter. "All right. I'll tell you everything I know, but some of it I'm still piecing together myself." "Second," she continued, "you stay out of sight. You're a wanted man, Jessie. If Brody's friends see you, they'll arrest you, or worse, shoot you on sight. And that won't help Samuel." He grinned, a flash of his old charm. "You want me to hide out? Like a scared rabbit?" "I want you to be smart," she corrected him. "You can stay at my place. It's above the diner, has a back entrance. No one needs to know you're there." His grin widened. "Sharing close quarters with you again, darlin'? That's a tempting offer." She ignored the suggestive tone in his voice, her cheeks flushing despite her best efforts. "It's a practical offer, Jessie. Nothing more. And third," she added, her voice firm, "no funny business. We're doing this for Samuel, not for us. There's no room for rekindling old flames." He held up his hands in a gesture of surrender. "Scout's honor, Tally. I'm here for Samuel. That's all." But his eyes, those stormy sea-green eyes, told a different story. There was a spark there, a flicker of desire that mirrored her own, no matter how much she tried to deny it. It was a dangerous game they were playing, a dance on the edge of a knife. "One more thing," Tally added, her voice barely a whisper. "If I find out you're lying to me, Jessie, if I find out you're using me, I'll turn you in myself." He met her gaze, his expression serious. "I understand, Tally. You have my word. I won't betray you again." Again. The word hung between them, a reminder of the past, of the pain he'd caused her. But it was also a promise, a hope for the future. She nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She'd made a bargain with the devil, a pact with the man who had broken her heart. But she had no choice. She had to save Samuel. And in doing so, perhaps, she could finally lay the ghost of Jessie Coulter to rest. Or perhaps, she'd find a way to begin again. The thought, both frightening and exhilarating, settled deep inside her, a seed of hope planted in the barren soil of her heart. She took a deep breath and squared her shoulders. It was a risky gamble. She just hoped she won. Chapter 4. The Price of Redemption. The back entrance to Tally's apartment was hidden in a narrow alleyway, shrouded in shadows even in the bright afternoon sun. Jessie followed her, his movements silent and cautious, like a predator stalking its prey. He'd shed his usual swagger, replaced by a wary alertness, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. The years spent on the run had honed his instincts, making him acutely aware of every sound, every movement, every potential threat. The stairs creaked under their weight, the sound amplified in the stillness of the alleyway. Tally pushed open the door, revealing a small, sparsely furnished room. It was a stark contrast to the bustling diner below, a haven of quiet and solitude. The air was thick with the scent of lavender and old books, a comforting aroma that reminded Jessie of simpler times, of a life before the violence and the betrayal. "It's not much," Tally said, her voice echoing slightly in the room, "but it's safe. No one comes up here except me." He looked around, taking in the details. A narrow bed neatly made in the corner, a small table with 2 chairs, a worn rug on the wooden floor, a bookshelf crammed with well-loved volumes. It was a reflection of Tally herself, practical, unpretentious, and yet undeniably appealing. There was a quiet strength to the room, a sense of resilience that mirrored her own. "It's perfect," he said, his voice softer than he intended. He hadn't expected this feeling of peace. He'd been living on the edge for so long, sleeping in dusty saloons, in makeshift camps, always with one eye open, one hand on his gun. This was different. This was home. Tally gestured towards the table. "Sit down, Jesse. I'll make some coffee." He sat, his body stiff and tense, his mind still racing. He needed to tell her everything, to lay bare the secrets that had been eating away at him for years. But the words caught in his throat, choked by guilt and shame. She placed a steaming mug in front of him, the aroma of coffee filling the room. She sat across from him, her eyes searching his. "Start from the beginning, Jesse. Tell me about Samuel. Tell me about Brody." He took a deep breath, forcing himself to meet her gaze. "Samuel, he was always the good one, Tally. The one who followed the rules, the one who did what was right. I was the opposite. I was reckless, wild, always getting into trouble." "I remember," Tally said, her voice soft, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and understanding. He continued, his voice heavy with regret. "I dragged Samuel into my mess. It started with small things, petty thefts, gambling debts. Then it got bigger. I fell in with the wrong crowd, a gang of outlaws led by a man named Silas Blackwood." Silas Blackwood. The name sent a shiver down Tally's spine. Blackwood was a legend in these parts, a ruthless, cold-blooded killer who had terrorized the territory for years. He was a ghost, a phantom, a name whispered in hushed tones. "Blackwood," she breathed, her eyes wide. "You were riding with Blackwood?" Jesse nodded, his face grim. "For a while. I was young, foolish, looking for excitement. I thought I was invincible. I thought I could handle anything." He paused, his gaze dropping to his hands, his fingers clenched tightly around the mug. "Samuel tried to stop me. He warned me about Blackwood, about the danger. But I wouldn't listen. I was too blinded by the thrill, by the promise of easy money." "What happened?" Tally asked, her voice barely a whisper. "We robbed a bank," Jesse said, his voice flat and emotionless. "It was a disaster. People got hurt. One man, he died." Tally gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She'd known Jesse was an outlaw, but she'd never imagined him involved in something so violent. "It wasn't me, Tally," Jesse said quickly, his eyes pleading with her to believe him. "I didn't kill anyone. But I was there. I was part of it. And I couldn't stop it." He looked up at her, his eyes filled with a pain that mirrored her own. "After that, I couldn't stay. I couldn't face Samuel, couldn't face myself. I rode out, leaving everything behind. I thought I could outrun my past. But I was wrong." "And Samuel?" Tally asked, her voice trembling. "What happened to him?" "He stayed," Jesse said, his voice heavy with guilt. "He took the blame. He protected me. He told everyone I'd been forced to participate, that I'd try to stop the robbery. He saved my life, Tally. And he paid the price." "Brody," Tally said, her voice sharp. "He knew the truth, didn't he? He knew Samuel was covering for you." Jesse nodded. "He found out somehow. He started blackmailing Samuel, threatening to expose him, to ruin his family. He wanted Samuel's ranch, wanted everything he had. He ran a hand through his hair. Samuel was desperate, cornered. He made a wrong move. Or so they say." The doubt in his tone was evident. "So, what now?" Tally asked, taking a slow sip of her coffee. The silence that followed was broken, momentarily, by the distant bray of a donkey. "Now," Jesse said, a steely glint appearing in his eye, "we find out who really killed Brody. And we clear Samuel's name." He looked intently into Tally's eyes and stated, his voice firm, "Even if it's the last thing I do." Chapter 5. Echoes of a Broken Promise. The afternoon sun slanted through the window, casting long shadows across the room, painting the scene in hues of gold and amber. The air was thick with unspoken tension, with the weight of Jesse's confession, with the daunting task that lay ahead. Tally leaned back in her chair, her mind swirling with questions, with doubts, with a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years' hope. So, Brody was blackmailing Samuel, she said, her voice thoughtful. That gives us a motive. But it doesn't give us a killer. Brody had plenty of enemies. Anyone could have wanted him dead. Jesse nodded, his gaze fixed on the swirling dust motes dancing in the sunlight. I know. But Samuel was the one who found the body. He was the one who had the most to lose. That's what makes him the prime suspect. We need to find out what Brody had on Samuel, Tally said, her voice firm. What was this something illegal that would ruin him? That's the key to understanding why Samuel was protecting someone, and who that someone might be. I've tried, Jesse said, his voice frustrated. I've asked around, talked to some of my old contacts, but no one knows anything. Or if they do, they're not talking. Then we need to talk to someone who will talk, Tally said, her eyes narrowing. Someone who knew Brody, someone who wasn't afraid of him, someone who might have known his secrets. Who? Jesse asked, his voice skeptical. Sarah, Tally said, her voice firm. Samuel's wife. The name hung in the air, heavy with unspoken emotions. Sarah Coulter. Tally had known Sarah since they were children, had shared secrets and dreams under the vast desert sky. They'd been as close as sisters, until Jesse had come along, and everything had changed. Sarah won't talk to me, Jesse said, his voice flat. She blames me for everything. For Samuel's troubles, for everything. She might talk to me, Tally said, her voice determined. We were friends once. She might trust me. It's risky, Tally, Jesse warned. If Sarah knows something, she might be in danger. Brody's killer might still be out there, watching, waiting. I can handle myself, Tally said, her chin lifting defiantly. I'm not afraid of shadows. And I won't let Samuel hang for a crime he didn't commit. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and concern. He saw the fire in her eyes, the determination in her stance, the unwavering loyalty to her friend. He saw the woman she had become, the strength she had forged in the crucible of hardship and loss. And he realized, with a pang of regret, that he had underestimated her. All right, he said, his voice resigned. We'll talk to Sarah. But we'll do it carefully. We'll watch her back, and we'll be ready for anything. He stood up, his movements slow and deliberate. He walked to the window, looking out at the dusty street below, at the town that held so many memories, so much pain, so much hope. There's something else you should know, Tally, he said, his voice low and hesitant. Something about us. She looked at him, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew what was coming. She could feel it in the air, in the way he looked at her, in the way he avoided her gaze. 15 years ago, he said, his voice barely a whisper, I didn't just ride out because of the robbery. I rode out because I was a coward. He turned to face her, his eyes filled with a pain that mirrored her own. I loved you, Tally, more than anything. But I was scared. Scared of settling down, scared of commitment, scared of failing you. The words hung between them, a confession, an apology, a plea for forgiveness. Tally felt a lump form in her throat, tears stinging her eyes. She'd waited 15 years to hear those words, to hear him admit the truth, to hear him say the things she'd always longed to hear. I made a promise to you, he continued, his voice raw with emotion. A promise I broke. I swore I'd come back for you. But I didn't. I let you down. I let us down. She stood up, her legs trembling slightly. She walked towards him, stopping just inches away. She looked up at him, her eyes searching his. Why are you telling me this now, Jesse? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. He reached out, his hand gently touching her cheek. His fingers were rough, calloused, but his touch was surprisingly gentle. Because I need you to know, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Because I need you to understand. I'm not that man anymore, Tally. I've changed. And I still care about you. More than you know. His words, his touch, sent a shiver down her spine. a wave of conflicting emotions washing over her. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust him, but the scars of the past were still too raw, too painful. She stepped back, breaking the contact, creating a distance between them. "We can't do this, Jessie," she said, her voice trembling.
"Not now."
"Not with Samuel's life hanging in the balance. We need to focus on him, on finding the truth. We can't afford to be distracted by old feelings." She turned, looking at the floor, the wall anywhere but at him. He nodded, his face etched with disappointment, but also with understanding. "You're right," he said, his voice resigned. "Samuel comes first. Always." He took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders, forcing himself to focus on the task at hand. "We'll talk to Sarah tomorrow," he said, his voice firm. "We'll get to the bottom of this. And we'll save Samuel. Together." But even as he said the words, he knew that the echoes of their broken promise would continue to haunt them, a constant reminder of what they had lost, of what they might never have again. The weight of it, he realized, was a burden they would both have to carry. Chapter 6. Scars Beneath the Surface. The journey to Samuel's ranch was a silent one, filled with unspoken tension and the weight of uncertainty. Tally drove the old, battered wagon, her hands gripping the reins tightly, her eyes fixed on the dusty road ahead. Jesse sat beside her, his body stiff and alert, his hand never far from the gun at his hip. The landscape was familiar, yet alien, the rolling hills and vast, open plains a stark reminder of the beauty and the danger that coexisted in this unforgiving land. The sun beat down mercilessly, the heat shimmering off the rocks and the sparse vegetation. The air was thick with the scent of sage and dust, a smell that brought back a flood of memories for Tally, memories of her childhood, of her friendship with Samuel and Sarah, of a time before Jesse had come along and shattered their peaceful world. She glanced at Jesse, his face etched with worry, his eyes scanning the horizon. He was a different man than the reckless, charming outlaw she remembered. The years had hardened him, etched lines of regret around his eyes and mouth, but they hadn't erased the core of him, the strength and the vulnerability that had drawn her to him in the first place. "How well do you know Sarah?" Jesse asked, his voice breaking the silence. Tally hesitated, her gaze shifting back to the road. "We were close once, like sisters. We shared everything. But things changed. After you left it wasn't the same. She blames me, doesn't she?" Jesse said, his voice flat. Tally didn't answer. She didn't need to. The truth was evident in the way Sarah had looked at her the few times they'd crossed paths in town, in the coldness in her eyes, in the unspoken accusation that hung between them. "I don't blame her," Jesse said, his voice low and strained. "I ruined her life, too. I dragged Samuel into my mess, and she's had to pay the price." Tally sighed, her heart aching for both of them. "We all make mistakes, Jesse. We all do things we regret. The important thing is what we do now, how we try to make things right." He nodded, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "I just hope it's not too late. For Samuel, for all of us." They arrived at the ranch in the late afternoon, the sun casting long shadows across the sprawling property. The house was a simple, two-story structure, built of wood and stone, surrounded by a wide porch. A few chickens pecked in the dusty yard, and a couple of horses grazed in the nearby corral. It was a scene of peaceful domesticity, a stark contrast to the turmoil that lay beneath the surface. Tally pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't sure what to expect, how Sarah would react to seeing her, to seeing Jesse. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the confrontation. They climbed down from the wagon, their boots crunching on the gravel path. The front door opened, and Sarah stood there, her face pale and drawn, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. She was thinner than Tally remembered, her clothes hanging loosely on her frame, but there was a strength in her stance, a resilience that belied her fragile appearance. Her gaze flickered from Tally to Jesse, her expression hardening. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice cold and hostile. "Sarah, we need to talk," Tally said, her voice gentle but firm. "It's about Samuel." Sarah's eyes narrowed. I have nothing to say to you. Or to him. She gestured towards Jesse, her voice dripping with contempt. Please, Sarah, Jesse said, his voice pleading. Just hear us out. We're trying to help Samuel. We're trying to prove his innocence. Sarah hesitated, her gaze searching Tally's face. She saw the sincerity in her eyes, the genuine concern, the unwavering loyalty to Samuel. And she saw something else, too, a flicker of understanding, a shared pain that transcended the years of estrangement. 5 minutes, she said, her voice grudging. And then you leave. She stepped aside, allowing them to enter the house. The interior was simple but cozy, filled with the scent of freshly baked bread and wood smoke. Family portraits adorned the walls, a testament to a life that had been shattered by tragedy. They sat in the parlor, the silence thick with unspoken accusations and unanswered questions. Sarah sat stiffly on the edge of a worn armchair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Tally sat opposite her, her gaze steady and compassionate. Jesse remained standing, his body tense and alert, his hand resting on the back of Tally's chair, a silent gesture of support. Brody was blackmailing Samuel, Tally began, her voice gentle. He was threatening to expose him, to ruin his family. We need to know what Brody had on him, Sarah. We need to know who Samuel was protecting. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, her lower lip trembling. I don't know, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Samuel wouldn't tell me. He said he was protecting me, protecting the children. He said it was better if I didn't know. But you must have some idea, Tally pressed, her voice insistent. Anything, any clue, could help us find the real killer. Sarah hesitated, her gaze darting around the room, as if she were afraid of being overheard. There was a letter, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Brody sent it to Samuel. I saw it once, but Samuel hid it before I could read it. Where is it now? Jesse asked, his voice sharp. Sarah shook her head. I don't know. Samuel burned it, I think. He was so scared, so desperate. Think, Sarah, Tally urged. Was there anything unusual about the letter? Anything that might give us a clue? Sarah shook her head again, and then paused. With a frown, she murmured. Wait. The envelope. It had a strange symbol on it. A circle dot with a snake inside. Her voice trailed off, leaving another mystery behind. Chapter 7. The Dance of Deception. A circle with a snake inside. The image burned in Tally's mind, a cryptic clue in a deadly game. It was something, a thread to follow in the tangled web of deceit and betrayal that surrounded Samuel's arrest. But what did it mean? A snake in a circle, Jesse repeated, his voice thoughtful. That sounds familiar, like a brand, maybe? Or a symbol, Tally suggested. Something secret. Sarah shook her head, her eyes filled with confusion. I don't know. I've never seen anything like it before. Samuel wouldn't talk about it. He burned the letter and told me to forget about it. We need to find out what that symbol means, Tally said, her voice determined. It could be the key to understanding who killed Brody, and why. But where do we start? Jesse asked, his voice frustrated. It could be anything, anyone. A secret society, a rival gang, a personal vendetta. Tally pondered, her mind racing. She needed to think, to connect the dots, to find a pattern in the chaos. The library, she said suddenly. Old Man Hemlock's collection. He had books on everything, from local history to ancient symbols. He might have something that can help us. Old Man Hemlock had been the town's unofficial historian, a recluse who lived on the outskirts of Redemption, surrounded by his vast collection of books and artifacts. He'd passed away a few years ago, but his library remained, a treasure trove of forgotten knowledge. It's a long shot, Jesse said, his voice skeptical. It's all we have, Tally countered. And we're running out of time. They left Sarah at the ranch, promising to return with news, promising to do everything they could to save Samuel. The drive back to town was filled with a renewed sense of purpose, a determination to unravel the mystery, to find the truth, no matter how dangerous. The library was a small, unassuming building, tucked away on a quiet side street. It was dark and dusty, the air thick with the scent of old paper and decaying leather. The shelves were crammed with books of all shapes and sizes, their spines cracked and faded, their pages yellowed with age. Tally and Jessie began their search, their fingers tracing the titles, their eyes scanning the shelves. They worked in silence, their movements methodical, their determination unwavering. Hours passed, the sun setting outside, casting long shadows across the room. "Anything?" Jessie asked, his voice weary. "Nothing yet," Tally replied, her voice frustrated. "But I'm not giving up." She continued her search, her fingers brushing against a worn, leather-bound volume. She pulled it from the shelf, its cover blank, its title long since faded. She opened it carefully, her heart pounding in her chest. The pages were filled with strange symbols, drawings of ancient rituals and cryptic inscriptions. She turned the pages slowly, her eyes scanning the images, her mind searching for a connection. And then she saw it, a drawing of a circle with a snake coiled inside. It was identical to the symbol Sarah had described, the symbol on the letter Brody had sent to Samuel. Beneath the drawing was a single word, written in faded ink: Ophidian. "Jessie," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I think I found something." He rushed to her side, his eyes widening as he saw the drawing. "Ophidian," he read, his voice thoughtful. "What does it mean?" Tally turned the pages, searching for more information. She found a passage, written in a spidery script, that described the Ophidian as an ancient secret society, a cult that worshipped snakes and practiced dark rituals. They were said to be ruthless and powerful, their influence extending throughout the territory. "A secret society," Jessie breathed, his face grim. "That's what Samuel was involved in? That's who he was protecting?" "It looks that way," Tally said, her voice heavy with dread.
"But why? What did they want from him?
And why did they kill Brody?" The answer, they knew, was hidden somewhere in the shadows, in the secrets of the Ophidian, in the twisted web of lies and betrayals that had ensnared Samuel. And they were determined to find it, no matter the cost. They kept researching and discovered a local connection. A nearby abandoned mine was rumored to be a meeting spot. "We go tonight," Jessie said, without hesitation. His resolve was clear. The old mine was dangerous, but it was their only real lead. Tally nodded, a sense of dread and excitement churning through her. Chapter 8. Unveiling the Past. The abandoned mine lay several miles outside of Redemption, nestled in a desolate canyon, a scar on the face of the landscape. It was a place of shadows and whispers, a relic of a bygone era, a testament to the greed and ambition that had driven men to delve deep into the earth in search of riches. Now it was a haven for outlaws, a refuge for those who lived on the fringes of society, a place where secrets were buried and darkness reigned. Tally and Jessie rode under the cover of darkness, the moon a sliver in the inky sky, the stars their only guides. The air was cool and crisp, the silence broken only by the rhythmic beat of their horses' hooves and the occasional howl of a distant coyote. The sense of danger was palpable, a knot of tension tightening in Tally's stomach with each passing mile. They dismounted a short distance from the mine entrance, tethering their horses to a scraggly mesquite bush. Jessie drew his gun, his movements silent and practiced, his eyes scanning the surrounding darkness. Tally carried a lantern, its flickering flame casting eerie shadows on the canyon walls. "Stay close," Jessie whispered, his voice barely audible. "And be ready for anything." Tally nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't afraid, not exactly, but she was acutely aware of the risks, of the potential for violence, of the darkness that lurked within the depths of the mine. They approached the entrance cautiously, their senses on high alert. The opening was a gaping maw in the rock face, a black void that seemed to swallow the light. The air emanating from within was cold and damp, carrying the scent of decay and something else, something metallic and acrid. Jessie stepped inside first, his gun held ready, his body tense and alert. Tally followed close behind, the lantern casting a small circle of light in the oppressive darkness. The tunnel sloped downwards, the ground uneven and treacherous, littered with loose rocks and debris. They moved slowly, their footsteps echoing in the silence, their breaths misting in the cold air. The deeper they went, the darker it became, the lantern's light barely penetrating the gloom. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the occasional drip of water and the distant scuttling of unseen creatures. "I don't like this," Tally whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "We're almost there," Jesse replied, his voice reassuring. "Just a little further." They rounded a bend in the tunnel, and then they saw it. A large cavern, illuminated by the flickering light of several torches. In the center of the cavern was a makeshift altar, fashioned from rough-hewn stone. And on the altar, etched into the stone, was the symbol of the Ophidian, a circle, with a snake coiled inside. But that wasn't all. Scattered around the cavern were several figures, cloaked and hooded, their faces hidden in shadow. They were chanting in a low, guttural tone, their voices echoing off the cavern walls. It was a scene straight out of a nightmare, a glimpse into a dark and hidden world. "The Ophidian," Jesse breathed, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and dread. Tally's hand tightened around the lantern, her knuckles white. She felt a shiver run down her spine, a primal fear that resonated deep within her bones. "What do we do?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We watch," Jesse replied, his voice grim. "We listen. We try to find out what they're planning, who they are." They concealed themselves behind a large rock formation, their bodies pressed against the cold stone, their hearts pounding in their chests. They watched the ritual unfold, their eyes wide with horror and fascination. The chanting grew louder, more frenzied, the figures swaying back and forth in a hypnotic rhythm. One of the figures, taller than the others, stepped forward, his voice rising above the others. He was the leader, Tally realized, the high priest of this dark cult. He raised his hands, holding a ceremonial dagger aloft. The blade gleamed in the torchlight, reflecting the flickering flames. He began to speak, his voice echoing through the cavern, his words chilling Tally to the bone. "We are the Ophidian," he intoned, "the keepers of the ancient secrets, the guardians of the darkness. We have been wronged, betrayed by those who sought to destroy us. But we will rise again. We will have our revenge." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the assembled figures. "Tonight, we offer a sacrifice to the Great Serpent. A sacrifice that will appease his hunger, that will empower us to achieve our goals." Two of the figures dragged a struggling form forward, a man bound and gagged, his eyes wide with terror. Tally recognized him instantly. It was one of the town's merchants, a man named Peterson. "Peterson," she whispered, her voice filled with horror. "What are they doing to him?" "They're going to kill him," Jesse said, his voice grim. "They're going to sacrifice him to their god." And standing in the circle, looking impassive and somehow involved, was Deputy Sheriff Harlan, the same man tasked with investigating Brody's murder. The truth, stark and unavoidable, unraveled everything. The ritual continued, the chanting growing more intense, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. Tally knew they had to do something, they had to stop it.
But how?
They were outnumbered, outgunned, trapped in the heart of darkness. She closed her eyes and took a quick breath. She may not have a gun, but she was Tallulah Boone, and she was far from helpless. Chapter 9. Crossroads of the Heart. The scene unfolding before them was a tableau of horror, a descent into a primal darkness that Tally had only read about in forbidden books. Deputy Harlan's presence solidified the sickening truth. The law itself was corrupted, twisted into a tool of this sinister cult. They had to act, and act fast, but any rash move could cost them their lives and Peterson's. "We need a distraction," Jesse whispered, his eyes scanning the cavern, calculating the odds. "Something to disrupt the ritual, give us a chance to get Peterson out of here." Tally's mind raced. She looked around the cavern, searching for anything they could use to their advantage. Her gaze fell upon a pile of loose rocks near the entrance, remnants of a previous collapse. An idea sparked in her mind, dangerous but potentially effective. I have an idea, she whispered, her voice tight with urgency. But it's risky. Risky is our middle name, darlin', Jesse replied, a grim smile playing on his lips. What's your plan? Tally explained her idea, her voice low and hurried. It involved creating a rock slide, a diversion that would hopefully scatter the cult members and give them a window of opportunity to rescue Peterson. It was a gamble, a desperate attempt to disrupt the ritual, but it was the best chance they had. Jesse nodded, his eyes filled with a mixture of apprehension and admiration. All right, Tally. Let's do it. But be careful. One wrong move, and we're both dead. They crept back towards the entrance, their movements slow and cautious, their hearts pounding in their chests. Tally gathered a handful of small stones, her hands trembling slightly. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the task ahead. On my signal, Jesse whispered, his hand resting on his gun. Get ready. Tally nodded, her gaze fixed on the pile of loose rocks. She took aim, her arm tense, her muscles coiled like a spring. She hurled the stones, one after another, at the weakest point in the rock formation. The stones struck their target with a sharp crack, dislodging a shower of pebbles and dust. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a low rumble echoed through the cavern, growing louder with each passing second. The rock slide began, slowly at first, then with increasing speed and force. Large boulders tumbled down, crashing into the cavern floor, sending dust and debris flying in all directions. The cult members scattered, their chanting turning into screams of terror, their ritual disrupted by the sudden chaos.
Now,
Jesse shouted, his voice rising above the roar of the collapsing rocks. He charged into the cavern, his gun drawn, firing into the air. The shots echoed through the cavern, adding to the confusion and panic. Tally followed close behind, the lantern casting a flickering light on the scene of chaos. The cult members, disoriented and terrified, scrambled for safety, their carefully orchestrated ritual shattered. Deputy Harlan, his face contorted with rage and fear, tried to rally his followers, but it was too late. The cavern was in chaos, the air thick with dust and the smell of gunpowder. Jesse reached Peterson, who was still bound and gagged on the altar. He quickly cut the ropes, freeing him from his bonds. Peterson, dazed and terrified, stumbled to his feet, his eyes wide with disbelief.
Go,
Jesse shouted, pushing Peterson towards the entrance. Get out of here. Peterson didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled towards the exit, his movements clumsy and desperate. Tally grabbed his arm, helping him navigate the treacherous terrain. Harlan, Jesse shouted, firing another shot in the air. Harlan, the corrupt deputy, turned toward the sound. His face was a mask of fury. He raised his own gun, pointing it at Jesse. Tally saw the danger, her heart leaping into her throat. She reacted instinctively, throwing herself in front of Jesse, shielding him with her body. A deafening silence came. Then a scream. Not Tally's, but Harlan's. Jesse had shot him in the arm, and the deputy was disarmed, groveling on the mine floor. Let's go, Jesse urged, grabbing her hand. They ran, their footsteps echoing through the collapsing tunnel, the roar of the rock slide growing louder behind them. They reached the entrance just as the roof of the cavern began to cave in, burying the altar and the remnants of the ritual under tons of rock and debris. They stumbled out into the cool night air, gasping for breath, their bodies covered in dust and sweat. They were safe for now, but they knew they weren't out of danger yet. The Ophidian were still out there, and they would be looking for revenge. They retrieved their horses, mounting quickly and riding away from the mine, leaving the darkness and the secrets behind. As they rode, the weight of what they'd witnessed, of what they'd done, settled upon them. Tally leaned against Jesse, exhausted but strangely exhilarated. They'd faced death and survived. They'd disrupted a dark ritual and exposed a corrupt lawman. But they'd also stirred up a hornet's nest, a dangerous enemy that would stop at nothing to silence them. He looked down at her, his face etched with concern. Are you all right, Tally? She nodded, her voice hoarse.
I'm fine.
Just shaken. He tightened his arm around her, his touch reassuring. "We did it, darlin'. We saved Peterson. We exposed Harlan. We're one step closer to clearing Samuel's name." But even as he said the words, Tally knew that their journey was far from over. They had won a battle, but the war was just beginning. And the crossroads they now faced was not just about Samuel's freedom, but about their own tangled past and the uncertain future that lay ahead. The ride was silent, but their hearts were screaming. Chapter 10. Flames in the Gathering Storm. The ride back to redemption was a blur of adrenaline and fear, the night air whipping past them, the stars a silent witness to their desperate flight. They knew Harlan wouldn't stay down for long. Wounded and exposed, he'd be like a cornered rattlesnake, striking out at anything that moved. And they were directly in his path. They arrived back at Tally's apartment just as the first rays of dawn were painting the sky a pale pink. Exhaustion weighed heavily on them, their bodies aching, their minds racing. They secured their horses in the hidden stable behind the diner, a precaution against prying eyes. "We need to tell someone," Tally said, her voice weary. "Someone we can trust. Sheriff Dobbs, maybe?" Jesse shook his head. "Dobbs is new to town. He replaced Brody. We don't know him, don't know where his loyalties lie. He could be in league with Harlan for all we know. But we can't just do nothing," Tally protested. "Harlan will be coming after us. And he'll be looking for Peterson, too." "We need to get Peterson out of town," Jesse said, his voice grim. "Somewhere safe, somewhere Harlan can't reach him."
"But where?"
Tally asked, her mind struggling to find a solution. "Harlan has eyes and ears everywhere. He controls the town." Jesse pondered, his gaze fixed on the floor, his brow furrowed in concentration. "There's one place," he said finally. "A place Harlan wouldn't dare to go. A place outside his jurisdiction." "Where?" Tally asked, her voice filled with a flicker of hope. "The Blackwood Ranch," Jesse replied, his voice low and hesitant. The name sent a chill down Tally's spine. Silas Blackwood, the notorious outlaw, the leader of the gang Jesse had once ridden with. The man who had cast a long shadow over their lives. "Blackwood?" she repeated, her voice incredulous. "Are you crazy, Jesse? He's a ruthless killer. He'll turn us in, or worse, kill us himself." "He owes me," Jesse said, his voice firm. "I saved his life once, back when I was riding with him. He swore he'd repay the debt. It's a long shot, but it's our best chance." Tally hesitated, her mind reeling. Trusting Blackwood was a dangerous gamble, a leap of faith into the unknown. But they were running out of options, running out of time. "All right," she said, her voice resigned. "We'll go to Blackwood. But we do it my way. We'll be careful, we'll be prepared, and we won't trust him any further than we can throw him." They quickly gathered supplies, food, water, ammunition, enough to last them for a few days. They left a note for Sarah, explaining everything, urging her to stay hidden, to trust no one. They knew it was a risk, but they had to warn her. As they were preparing to leave, a loud banging on the diner door below startled them. Jesse drew his gun, his body tense and alert. "Stay here," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I'll check it out." He crept down the stairs, his movements silent and cautious. Tally followed close behind, her heart pounding in her chest. She peered through the window, her eyes widening in disbelief. It was Sheriff Dobbs, accompanied by 2 deputies. They were armed and looked determined. "Open up, Tally," Dobbs shouted, his voice booming through the door. "We know you're in there. We need to talk to you about Harlan." Jesse and Tally exchanged a look of confusion and apprehension. What did Dobbs want? Was he here to arrest them? Or was he here to help? Jesse hesitated, his hand still on his gun. "We can't trust him, Tally. It could be a trap. But we can't run forever," Tally replied, her voice firm. "We need to find out what he wants. We need to know if he's on our side." She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the confrontation. She opened the door, her gaze steady and defiant. "Sheriff Dobbs," she said, her voice calm and controlled. "What can I do for you?" Dobbs stepped inside, his gaze sweeping over the diner, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. He looked at Jesse, his hand moving towards his gun. "Who's this, Tally?" he asked, his voice sharp. "This is Jesse Coulter," Tally replied, her voice unwavering. "He's here to help me clear his brother's name." Dobbs' eyes widened in surprise. "Jesse Coulter? The outlaw?" "The wrongfully accused outlaw," Jesse corrected him, his voice laced with defiance. Dobbs studied them both, his expression unreadable. He seemed to be weighing his options, calculating the risks. "Harlan's been shot," Dobbs said finally, his voice grim. "He claims you two attacked him, tried to kill him." "He's lying," Tally said, her voice filled with outrage. "He's the one who's corrupt. He's part of a secret society, the Ophidian. They killed Brody, and they framed Samuel." Dobbs listened, his expression skeptical. "Do you have any proof of this?" Tally and Jesse exchanged a look. They had the knowledge, the experience, but no concrete proof that would hold up in court. "We were at the Ophidian's meeting place," Jesse said, his voice firm. "An abandoned mine outside of town. We saw Harlan there participating in a ritual. They were about to sacrifice a man, a merchant named Peterson. We rescued Peterson," Tally added. "But Harlan got away. He'll be coming after us, and he'll be looking for Peterson, too." Dobbs pondered, his mind racing. He'd heard rumors of the Ophidian, whispers of a dark cult operating in the shadows. But he dismissed them as idle gossip, the fantasies of bored townsfolk. Now he wasn't so sure. Suddenly, a massive explosion rocked the building. Fire erupted outside, near the stables. "They're here," Jesse yelled. "Harlan's men." He looked at Dobbs, a question and challenge in his eyes. "Are you with us, or against us?" The flames rose higher, setting the tone. Chapter 11. The Weight of Unspoken Truths. The explosion sent splinters of wood and glass flying, the diner shaking on its foundations. The air filled with the acrid smell of smoke and burning wood, the shouts of men, and the crackle of flames, a terrifying symphony of chaos. Harlan had found them, and he wasn't wasting any time. Sheriff Dobbs, momentarily stunned by the sudden attack, quickly regained his composure. He drew his gun, his face grim, his eyes filled with a steely determination. "I'm with you," he said, his voice firm. "Let's get out of here." He turned to his deputies, barking orders. "Secure the perimeter. Find Peterson. And take down anyone who resists." The deputies, spurred into action, rushed outside, their guns drawn, ready to engage the attackers. Jesse grabbed Tally's hand, pulling her towards the back entrance. "We need to go now," he shouted, his voice urgent. "The whole place is going up in flames." They ran through the back alley, the heat of the fire searing their skin, the smoke choking their lungs. They reached the hidden stable, where their horses were already saddled and ready to go. "Where's Peterson?" Tally asked, her voice frantic. "We can't leave him." "He's not here," Jesse replied, his voice grim. "He must have run when the explosion happened. We have to trust that he can take care of himself." They mounted their horses, urging them into a gallop, leaving the burning diner behind. They rode hard, their horses' hooves pounding the dusty ground, their hearts racing with adrenaline and fear. As they rode, Tally couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt, a sense of responsibility for Peterson's safety. They had rescued him from the Ophidian, only to put him in even greater danger. "We should have gone with him," she said, her voice filled with regret. "We should have made sure he was safe." "We had no choice, Tally," Jesse replied, his voice firm. "We were outnumbered, outgunned. We had to get out of there, or we'd all be dead." "But what if Harlan finds him?" Tally persisted. "What if he—" "We'll find him," Jesse interrupted, his voice reassuring. "We'll get him to Blackwood, and then we'll come back for Harlan. We'll finish this, once and for all." They rode in silence for a while, the weight of their unspoken fears hanging heavy between them. The fire and redemption had not only destroyed Tally's diner, but it had also ignited a new level of danger, a clear declaration of war from Harlan and the Ophidian. As they approached the outskirts of town, they saw a figure running towards them, waving his arms frantically. It was Peterson, his clothes torn and dirty, his face streaked with soot and sweat. "Tally! Jesse!" he shouted, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. "They're after me. Harlan's men, they're everywhere." Jesse and Tally reined in their horses, their eyes filled with relief. They had found him just in time. "Get on," Jesse said, extending his hand to Peterson. "We'll get you out of here." Peterson scrambled onto Jesse's horse, clinging to him tightly. They rode on, their pace quickening, their destination clear: the Blackwood Ranch. The journey to the ranch was fraught with peril, the constant threat of pursuit hanging over them like a dark cloud. They avoided the main roads, sticking to the back trails, the hidden paths known only to outlaws and those who lived on the fringes of society. As they rode, Tally couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that Harlan's eyes were everywhere, that they were walking into a trap. She glanced at Jesse, his face etched with worry, his eyes scanning the horizon. He felt it too, the unspoken tension, the weight of their precarious situation. They reached the Blackwood Ranch under the cover of darkness, the moon a sliver in the inky sky. The ranch was a sprawling complex of buildings, surrounded by a high fence, guarded by armed men. It was a fortress, a haven for outlaws, a place where the law held no sway. Jesse approached the gate, his hand resting on his gun. He called out to the guards, his voice clear and steady. "I'm Jesse Coulter," he announced. "I'm here to see Silas Blackwood. He owes me a debt." The guards, suspicious and wary, eyed them cautiously. They recognized Jesse, his reputation preceding him. They hesitated for a moment, then, with a grudging nod, opened the gate. They were escorted into the main house, a large, imposing structure built of stone and wood. The interior was lavishly furnished, a stark contrast to the rugged exterior. It was a display of wealth and power, a testament to Blackwood's success as an outlaw. They were led into a spacious study, where Silas Blackwood awaited them. He was a tall, imposing figure, with piercing blue eyes and a grizzled beard. He was dressed in expensive clothes, a silver-handled revolver strapped to his hip. He exuded an aura of danger and authority, a man who was used to getting his way. Blackwood studied them, his gaze sharp and assessing. He recognized Jesse instantly, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. "Jesse Coulter," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "I'll be damned. I never thought I'd see you again." He gestured for them to approach. The weight of the past and the uncertain future pressed down on them all. The air was filled with a palpable tension. Chapter 12. A desperate gamble. Blackwood's study was a testament to his ill-gotten gains, a lavishly decorated room filled with expensive furniture, ornate rugs, and a collection of weapons that would make any gunsmith envious. The air was thick with the scent of cigar smoke and expensive whiskey, a smell that brought back a flood of memories for Jesse, memories of a life he'd tried to leave behind. "So, Jesse," Blackwood said, his voice laced with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. "What brings you to my humble abode? And with such interesting company?" He eyed Tally and Peterson, his gaze lingering on Tally, a predatory gleam in his eyes. "I need your help, Silas," Jesse replied, his voice firm and unwavering. "I'm calling in that debt you owe me." Blackwood raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing on his lips. "A debt, you say?"
"It's been a long time, Jesse."
"Debts tend to expire." "Not this one," Jesse countered. "You swore you'd repay me. You said you'd do anything for me. This is it." Blackwood leaned back in his chair, his gaze sweeping over them, assessing their desperation, their vulnerability. He was a man who enjoyed power, who reveled in the weakness of others. He was a predator, and they were his prey. "And what is it you need, Jesse?" he asked, his voice smooth and silky.
"Money?
"Guns?
Men?"
"I need sanctuary," Jesse replied. "For me, for Tally, and for Peterson here. We're being hunted by a corrupt lawman, a man named Harlan. He's part of a secret society, the Ophidian. They killed Sheriff Brody, and they framed my brother, Samuel, for the murder." Blackwood listened, his expression unreadable. He'd heard rumors of the Ophidian, whispers of a dark cult operating in the shadows. He'd dismissed them as nonsense, the ramblings of superstitious fools. But now, seeing the desperation in Jesse's eyes, hearing the urgency in his voice, he wasn't so sure. "And what's in it for me?" he asked, his voice sharp. "Why should I risk my neck for you, for your friends? I'm not a charitable organization, Jesse. I'm an outlaw." "Harlan is a threat to everyone," Jesse said, his voice insistent. "He's corrupt, he's ruthless, and he's growing more powerful by the day. If he's not stopped, he'll control the entire territory. He'll come after you, Silas. He'll come after everyone." Blackwood pondered, his mind racing. He was a pragmatist, a survivor. He knew that Jesse was right. Harlan was a threat, a cancer that needed to be cut out. But helping Jesse was a risk, a gamble that could cost him everything. "All right, Jesse," he said finally, his voice resigned. "I'll help you. But on my terms." Jesse nodded, his relief tempered by caution. "What are your terms, Silas?" "You stay here, at the ranch," Blackwood said, his voice firm. "You're under my protection, but you're also under my control. You follow my rules, you do what I say, and you don't cause any trouble." And he added, his gaze fixed on Tally, "Your friend here, she'll be my guest. She'll stay in the main house, under my personal supervision." Tally bristled at his words, her eyes flashing with anger. "I'm not your property, Blackwood. I'm not staying here with you." "You are if you want my help," Blackwood countered, his voice cold and unwavering. "It's my way, or the highway, darlin'. Take it or leave it." Jesse saw the look in Tally's eyes, the defiance, the refusal to be controlled. He knew he had to intervene, to defuse the situation before it escalated. "Silas," he said, his voice calm and reasonable, "Tally is with me. She's my responsibility. She stays with me." Blackwood glared at him, his jaw clenched tight. He wasn't used to being challenged, to being denied. But he also knew that Jesse was a dangerous man, a man who wouldn't hesitate to fight for what he believed in.
Fine, Blackwood conceded grudgingly.
"She stays with you. But you keep her in line, Jesse. Or you'll both answer to me." They were shown to a small, sparsely furnished cabin on the edge of the ranch, far from the main house. It was a clear indication of Blackwood's distrust, his unwillingness to fully embrace them. As they settled in, the weight of their situation settled upon them. They were safe for now, but they were also prisoners, trapped in a gilded cage, their fate in the hands of a ruthless outlaw. Tally paced the room, her frustration evident in every movement. "I don't trust him, Jesse," she said, her voice low and angry. "He's up to something. He's playing us." "I know," Jesse replied, his voice weary. "But we have no choice. We need his protection, his resources. We're in his territory, and we have to play by his rules.
For now."
"But what about Samuel?" Tally asked, her voice filled with despair. "We're stuck here, while he's still in jail, facing the gallows." "We'll find a way, Tally," Jesse said, his voice reassuring. "We'll clear Samuel's name, and we'll take down Harlan. We just need to be patient, to be smart, to wait for our opportunity." He walked towards her and held her close. He needed this as much as she did. But even as he held her, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap, a web of deceit and betrayal that could cost them everything. Blackwood was a dangerous ally, a man who could turn on them at any moment. And they were caught in the middle, their lives hanging in the balance, their future uncertain. The gamble, he realized, had only just begun. Chapter 13. The Eye of the Hurricane. Life at the Blackwood Ranch settled into an uneasy routine. Days bled into nights, marked by a tense undercurrent of suspicion and forced civility. Jesse and Tally were treated as guests, but they were always aware of the watchful eyes of Blackwood's men, the unspoken threat that hung in the air. They were prisoners in all but name, their freedom curtailed, their movements restricted. Peterson, still shaken by his ordeal, kept to himself, rarely venturing out of the cabin. He was a broken man, haunted by the horrors he had witnessed, his trust shattered, his spirit wounded. Tally tried to comfort him, to offer him solace, but her words seemed to fall on deaf ears. He was lost in his own private hell, a prisoner of his own trauma. Jesse spent his days training, honing his skills with a gun, preparing for the inevitable confrontation with Harlan. He was a man obsessed, driven by a burning desire for revenge, for justice, for redemption. He knew that Harlan wouldn't rest until he was dead, until Tally and Peterson were silenced, until Samuel was hanged. And he was determined to stop him, no matter the cost. Tally, meanwhile, tried to find ways to be useful, to contribute to their cause. She helped with the chores around the cabin, tended to the horses, and even offered her services as a cook, her culinary skills a welcome addition to the ranch's rough and ready fare. But her mind was always elsewhere, searching for a way out of their predicament, a way to clear Samuel's name, a way to escape Blackwood's clutches. She observed Blackwood closely, studying his habits, his interactions with his men, his comings and goings. She was looking for a weakness, a vulnerability, a crack in his armor. She knew he was a dangerous man, a ruthless outlaw, but he was also a man of secrets, of hidden agendas. And she was determined to uncover them. One evening, as she was returning to the cabin after helping in the kitchen, she overheard a conversation between Blackwood and one of his lieutenants, a gruff, scarred man named Scarface Bart. They were discussing a shipment, a delivery of something valuable, something that was being transported under heavy guard. "The Ophidian are getting restless," Bart said, his voice low and urgent. "They want their payment. They want their goods." "Tell them they'll get what they're owed," Blackwood replied, his voice cold and dismissive. "But on my terms. I'm not their errand boy." "They're not happy, Silas," Bart persisted. "They're talking about retaliation. They're talking about taking matters into their own hands." "Let them try," Blackwood scoffed. "They'll find out that I'm not a man to be trifled with." Tally, hidden in the shadows, listened intently, her heart pounding in her chest. She had stumbled upon something important, a connection between Blackwood and the Ophidian, a secret deal that could be the key to unraveling the entire conspiracy. She waited until Blackwood and Bart had moved on, then she slipped away, her mind racing. She had to tell Jesse, had to share this crucial piece of information. She found him in the cabin, cleaning his gun, his face etched with concentration. She told him what she had heard, her voice low and urgent. Jesse listened, his eyes widening in surprise, his grip tightening on his gun. "Blackwood is working with the Ophidian," he said, his voice grim. "He's supplying them with something. Something they need." "But what?" Tally asked, her voice filled with confusion. "What could they possibly want from Blackwood?" "I don't know," Jesse replied, his voice thoughtful. "But I intend to find out. This could be our chance, Tally. Our chance to expose them all, to clear Samuel's name, to bring them to justice." He looks at her and murmurs, a trace of his former self peeking through. "We're going to get through this, Tally. Together." But Tally remained doubtful. They were at the center of everything. And it felt like a calm. Before the storm. Chapter 14. Blood on the Sand. The discovery of Blackwood's alliance with the Ophidian injected a new sense of urgency into their desperate situation. They were sitting on a powder keg, surrounded by enemies, with no clear path to safety. Jesse knew they had to act quickly, before Blackwood discovered their snooping, before the Ophidian made their next move. "We need to find out what Blackwood is supplying the Ophidian," Jesse said, his voice determined. "That's the key to understanding their plans, to stopping them."
"But how?"
Tally asked, her voice filled with frustration. "We're prisoners here, Jesse. We can't just go wandering around the ranch, asking questions." "We need to be smart," Jesse replied, his mind racing. "We need to be discreet. We need to find someone we can trust, someone who might know something." They considered their options, their choices limited by their confinement. Peterson was too traumatized to be of any help. Blackwood's men were loyal to their leader, unlikely to betray him. They were on their own, surrounded by enemies. Then Tally remembered something. A conversation she'd had with one of the ranch hands, a young woman named Maria, who had shown kindness and sympathy towards her. Maria was different from the others, softer, more compassionate. She had seemed disillusioned with the outlaw life, yearning for something more. "Maria," Tally said, her voice filled with a flicker of hope. "She might know something. She's different." She doesn't seem to belong here. It's risky, Jesse warned. If she betrays us, we're dead. It's a risk we have to take, Tally countered. We're running out of time, Jesse. We need to find out the truth. They decided to approach Maria, to try to gain her trust, to see if she could shed any light on Blackwood's dealings with the Ophidian. They found her in the stables, tending to the horses, her movements graceful and efficient. They approached her cautiously, their voices low and conspiratorial. They explained their situation, their suspicions about Blackwood, their desperate need for information. Maria listened, her eyes wide with surprise and fear. She hesitated for a moment, her loyalty to Blackwood warring with her conscience, with her desire to do what was right. I don't know anything, she whispered, her voice trembling. I just take care of the horses. Please, Maria, Tally pleaded. We're desperate. Samuel's life is on the line. We need your help. Maria looked at them, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and compassion. She saw the desperation in their faces, the genuine plea for help. And she knew she couldn't turn them away. There's a shipment, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Coming in tonight. I don't know what it is, but it's important. Blackwood's been nervous. He's been giving orders, making preparations. Where? Jesse asked, his voice urgent. Where is the shipment coming in? The old trading post, Maria replied. Near the border. It's abandoned, but Blackwood uses it for secret meetings. The old trading post. It was a remote location, far from prying eyes, a perfect place for an illicit rendezvous. It was also dangerous, exposed, a potential death trap. Thank you, Maria, Jesse said, his voice filled with gratitude. You've done a brave thing. They left Maria in the stables, their minds racing with this new information. They had a location, a time, a lead. But they also had a decision to make. Do they confront Blackwood? Do they try to intercept the shipment? Or do they go to Sheriff Dobbs, hoping he can be trusted? Before they had a chance to really analyze the options, a shot rang out. It was followed by another. And another. Shouts came from every direction. They're here. One voice yelled. Harlan's men. It was chaos. An ambush, right in the heart of Blackwood's territory. The ranch hands fought valiantly, but the surprise gave Harlan's men the upper hand. Jesse immediately pushed Tally behind a water trough, drawing his own weapon. Stay down, he commanded. They had to fight, even if the odds were terrible. They were trapped, surrounded by gunfire, trapped between two warring factions, with blood staining the sand. It was a fight for their lives, now. Chapter 15. Between Ruin and Salvation. The air exploded with the roar of gunfire, the acrid smell of gunpowder filling the air. Shouts, screams, and the thud of falling bodies created a cacophony of chaos. Jesse, his back pressed against the water trough, fired with deadly accuracy. Each shot aimed to protect Tally and himself, while trying to assess the situation. Harlan's attack was bold, unexpected, a direct assault on Blackwood's stronghold. They must have followed us. Tally shouted over the din, her voice trembling but resolute. She peeked over the trough, her eyes searching for an escape route, a way out of this deadly crossfire. Or Blackwood betrayed us, Jesse replied grimly, reloading his revolver. He could have made a deal with Harlan, traded us for something or someone. The thought sent a chill down Tally's spine. Blackwood's duplicity was a constant threat, a shadow that loomed over them since they'd arrived at the ranch. They were pawns in a larger game, caught between two ruthless forces, their lives hanging in the balance. They were pinned down, the water trough their only cover. Harlan's men, emboldened by their surprise attack, were advancing steadily, their gunfire relentless. Blackwood's men, caught off guard, were fighting back fiercely, but they were disorganized, scattered, their defenses crumbling. Jesse knew they couldn't stay there. They were sitting ducks, waiting to be picked off. They had to move, to find a better position, a way to fight back, or a way to escape. We need to get to the horses, Jesse said, his voice urgent. If we can reach the stables, we might have a chance to get out of here. But it's too dangerous, Tally protested. We'll be exposed. Out in the open. It's our only chance, Jesse countered. We can't stay here and wait to die. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the dash. He peeked over the trough, assessing the positions of Harlan's men, calculating their movements. On my signal, he whispered. Run as fast as you can. Don't stop for anything. He waited for a lull in the gunfire, a brief moment of respite. Then he shouted now. They bolted from behind the trough, running low to the ground, zigzagging to avoid the bullets that whizzed past them. They reached the stables, the wooden walls offering a temporary shield from the relentless gunfire. Inside, the horses were frantic, their eyes wide with terror, their hooves pounding the ground. The air was thick with the smell of hay and manure, a familiar scent that offered a strange sense of comfort amidst the chaos. They quickly saddled their horses, their hands trembling with urgency. They had to get out of there before Harlan's men surrounded the stables, before they were trapped again. As they were about to mount, a figure emerged from the shadows, his gun drawn, his face contorted with rage. It was Harlan, his eyes burning with hatred. Going somewhere? He sneered, his voice dripping with malice. You're not going anywhere. You're both going to die here tonight. Jesse pushed Tally behind him, shielding her with his body. He raised his gun, his aim steady, his finger on the trigger. It's over, Harlan, Jesse said, his voice cold and resolute. Your reign of terror is ending. Harlan laughed, a harsh, grating sound. You think you can stop me, Coulter? You're a dead man. And your little whore is going to watch you die. Before Jesse could react, a shot rang out. But it wasn't from Jesse's gun, nor Harlan's. Harlan staggered, his eyes widening in disbelief, a look of shock and pain on his face. He clutched at his chest, blood staining his shirt. He crumpled to the ground, his body lifeless. Standing behind him, a smoking gun in her hand, was Maria. Her face was pale, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. She had saved them, at the risk of her own life.
Go,
she shouted, her voice trembling. Get out of here, before more of them come. Jesse and Tally didn't need to be told twice. They mounted their horses, urging them into a gallop, leaving the burning ranch, the chaos, and the carnage behind. They rode hard, their horses' hooves pounding the dusty ground, their hearts racing with adrenaline and relief. They had survived, against all odds. But the battle was far from over. They found Peterson, hiding among some rocks. They had to keep moving. And they had to make a decision. Their lives, and Samuel's, depended on it. Chapter 16. Letters from a Forgotten Life. They rode until dawn, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the burning wreckage of Blackwood's ranch. The adrenaline that had fueled their escape slowly faded, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. They found a secluded spot near a small creek, hidden amongst a copse of cottonwood trees, a temporary refuge from the relentless pursuit. Peterson, still traumatized by his experiences, huddled near the water, his gaze distant, his body trembling. Tally tried to comfort him, offering him water and food, but he remained lost in his own private hell, a prisoner of his memories. Jesse, ever vigilant, scanned the horizon, his eyes searching for any sign of pursuit. He knew Harlan's death wouldn't end their troubles. The Ophidian were still out there, and they would be looking for revenge. And Blackwood, if he had survived the attack, would be a formidable enemy, fueled by a burning desire for retribution. We need to decide what to do, Tally said, her voice weary. We can't keep running forever. Jesse nodded, his face grim. We have two choices. We can go to Sheriff Dobbs, tell him everything, hope he can be trusted. Or we can go after the Ophidian ourselves, try to find proof of their involvement in Brody's murder, clear Samuel's name. Dobbs is a risk, Tally said, her voice filled with doubt. He might still be in league with them. He might arrest us, hand us over to Blackwood or worse. But going after the Ophidian is even more dangerous, Jesse countered. They're a powerful, secret organization. We don't know who they are, where they are, how many of them there are. They fell silent, their minds grappling with the impossible choices, the daunting odds. They were caught between ruin and salvation, their lives hanging in the balance, their future uncertain. Then Tally remembered something. Something that might offer a glimmer of hope, a clue that could lead them to the truth. "The letters," she said, her voice suddenly filled with excitement. "Samuel's letters. The ones he kept hidden in his house." Sarah said, "He burned the one from Brody. But what about the others? What if there's something there, something that can help us?" Jesse's eyes widened in surprise. "You think there might be something in those letters? Something that could connect the Ophidian to Brody's murder?" "It's worth a try," Tally replied, her voice firm. "We need to go back to Samuel's ranch, search his house, find those letters." It was a risky proposition, returning to a place that was likely under surveillance by Harlan's men, or even the Ophidian themselves. But it was a risk they had to take. It was their only hope, their last chance to save Samuel, to clear their names, to bring the truth to light. They decided to wait until nightfall, to approach the ranch under the cover of darkness. They spent the day resting, conserving their energy, preparing for the perilous task ahead. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the landscape, they mounted their horses, their hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. They rode slowly, cautiously, avoiding the main roads, sticking to the hidden paths. They reached the outskirts of Samuel's ranch, dismounting a short distance from the house, tethering their horses to a clump of bushes. The house was dark, silent, seemingly deserted. But they knew that appearances could be deceiving. They approached the house stealthily, their senses on high alert, their weapons drawn. Jesse kicked in the back door, his movements swift and decisive. They entered the house, their footsteps echoing in the stillness, their breaths misting in the cool night air. The house was in disarray, ransacked by whoever had searched it before. Furniture was overturned, drawers were pulled out, papers were scattered everywhere. It was a scene of violation, a testament to the desperation of their enemies. They began their search, their fingers sifting through the debris, their eyes scanning every nook and cranny. They searched the living room, the kitchen, the bedrooms, finding nothing but chaos and destruction. Then, Tally remembered Samuel's study, a small room at the back of the house, where he kept his personal papers, his accounts, his secrets. They made their way to the study, their hearts pounding with anticipation. The study was a mess, just like the rest of the house. But amidst the chaos, Tally spotted a small, wooden box hidden beneath a pile of overturned books. She reached for it, her hands trembling slightly. She opened the box, revealing a stack of letters, neatly tied together with a faded ribbon. They were old letters, their edges yellowed with age, their ink faded but still legible. They were letters from Samuel's past, letters from a forgotten life. And among them was a letter with the Ophidian symbol. As she began to read, she pieced together a past Samuel had tried desperately to hide, a secret that had cost him everything. And a name emerged, Elias Thorne, a wealthy landowner, and secretly, the local leader of the Ophidian. Chapter 17. The Unforgiving Landscape of Love. The letters painted a picture of a Samuel far different from the gentle, law-abiding man Tally had known. They revealed a young Samuel, caught in a web of debt and desperation, forced to make choices that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Elias Thorne, a prominent figure in redemption, a man of wealth and influence, was the spider at the center of that web. Thorne, it turned out, was not only a wealthy landowner but also the local leader of the Ophidian, using his power and influence to manipulate and control those around him. He had lured Samuel into a series of bad investments, promising him riches and prosperity, only to trap him in a cycle of debt and obligation. The letters detailed Samuel's growing desperation, his pleas for help, his attempts to break free from Thorne's grasp. They also revealed the nature of the Ophidian's activities in redemption, land grabbing, extortion, and murder, all orchestrated by Thorne to consolidate his power and wealth. But the most damning letter of all was the one from Thorne to Samuel, written just weeks before Brody's murder. It was a threat, a demand for payment, a promise of retribution if Samuel failed to comply. And on the envelope, clear as day, was the symbol of the Ophidian, a circle, with a snake coiled inside. "This is it, Jesse," Tally said, her voice trembling with excitement and anger. This is the proof we need. Thorne is the one who killed Brody. He used Samuel, and then he framed him for the murder. Jesse took the letter, his eyes scanning the words, his face grim. Thorne, he muttered, his voice filled with a cold fury. I should have known. He's always been a snake, hiding in plain sight. But their relief was short-lived. A noise outside the window, the sound of approaching horses, shattered the momentary calm. They were not alone. Jesse peered through the window, his eyes narrowing. It's Thorne, he said, his voice low and urgent. He's here. And he's brought company. They were trapped, surrounded by Thorne and his men. They had the proof, but they were outnumbered, outgunned, their escape seemingly impossible. We need to get out of here, Tally said, her voice frantic. We need to get this letter to Dobbs, to expose Thorne. But how? Jesse asked, his mind racing. They're blocking the exits. We're surrounded. Then, Tally had an idea. A desperate gamble. A last-ditch effort to escape, to survive. The secret passage, she said, her voice filled with a flicker of hope. Samuel told me about it once, when we were children. It's hidden behind the bookcase in the study. It leads to the old root cellar, and then out to the back of the property. It was a long shot, a memory from a distant past. But it was their only chance. They rushed to the bookcase, their hands frantically searching for the hidden mechanism. They found it, a small, concealed lever, hidden behind a row of books. Jesse pulled the lever, and the bookcase swung open, revealing a narrow, dark passage.
Go!
Jesse shouted, pushing Tally into the passage. I'll hold them off. Tally hesitated, her heart torn. She didn't want to leave him, to face Thorne alone. But she knew she had to. She had to get the letter to safety, to expose Thorne, to save Samuel. Be careful, Jesse, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Please be careful. I will, he replied, his voice firm. I promise. He gave her one last look, a look filled with love, with regret, with a desperate hope for the future. Then, he turned and faced the door, his gun drawn, ready to confront Thorne and his men. Tally scrambled into the passage, the bookcase closing behind her, plunging her into darkness. She fumbled her way through the narrow tunnel, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind racing with fear and determination. She reached the root cellar, a damp, musty space filled with cobwebs and the scent of decay. She found the exit, a small, wooden door, hidden behind a stack of old crates. She pushed it open, emerging into the cool night air. She ran, her lungs burning, her legs aching, her heart filled with a desperate hope. She had to get to Dobbs, to show him the letter, to expose Thorne, to save Samuel, and to save Jesse. As she ran, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was leaving a part of herself behind, that the unforgiving landscape of love and loyalty had claimed another victim. She didn't know if Jesse would survive, if she would ever see him again. But she knew she had to keep going for him, for Samuel, for herself. The weight of their shared past and the uncertain future pressed down on her, a burden she would carry alone until she could find a way to set them all free. She had a long way to go, and she couldn't give up. Chapter 18. Riding towards the dawn. Tally ran until she could run no more, her lungs screaming for air, her legs burning with exhaustion. She stumbled, fell, picked herself up, and kept running, driven by a desperate hope, a fierce determination to survive, to expose Thorne, to save those she loved. She reached the outskirts of Redemption, the town a dark silhouette against the pale glow of the pre-dawn sky. She knew she had to be careful, to avoid detection. Thorne's men would be everywhere, searching for her, for the letter. She made her way to the sheriff's office, her heart pounding in her chest. She slipped through the back entrance, finding the office deserted, the silence eerie and unsettling. Sheriff Dobbs was nowhere to be found. She hesitated, her mind racing. Where was Dobbs? Was he out searching for her? Or was he with Thorne? She couldn't trust anyone, not anymore. Then, she heard a noise, a faint sound coming from the holding cells in the back. She crept towards the cells, her hand reaching for the small pistol she'd taken from Samuel's house, her only weapon, her only defense. She peered into the first cell, finding it empty. She moved to the next, and then the next, her heart sinking with each empty cell. Then, she reached the last cell, and her breath caught in her throat. There, slumped against the wall, his face bruised and battered, his clothes torn and dirty, was Jesse. He was alive, but barely. "Jesse," she whispered, her voice choked with relief and fear. He looked up, his eyes widening in surprise, a flicker of hope igniting in their depths. "Tally," he murmured, his voice weak and hoarse. You made it." She quickly unlocked the cell, her hands trembling with urgency. She helped him to his feet, his body swaying, his weight leaning heavily on her. "What happened?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. "How did you?" "Thorn," he interrupted, his voice grim. "He caught me after you left. He beat me, interrogated me. He wanted the letter." "But you didn't give it to him," Tally said, her voice filled with admiration. "No," Jesse replied, his voice firm. "I wouldn't betray you. I wouldn't betray Samuel." "We need to get you out of here," Tally said, her voice urgent. "We need to get you to a doctor." "No," Jesse said, his voice insistent. "We need to find Dobbs. We need to show him the letter, expose Thorn. Before it's too late." They stumbled out of the cell, their bodies weak and battered, their spirits clinging to a fragile hope. They made their way to the front of the office, just as the first rays of dawn were painting the sky a vibrant orange. And there, standing in the doorway, his gun drawn, his face grim, was Sheriff Dobbs. "Hold it right there," Dobbs said, his voice sharp. "You're both under arrest." Tally and Jesse froze, their hearts sinking. Had they been betrayed again? Was Dobbs in league with Thorn after all? "Dobbs, please," Tally pleaded. "You have to listen to us. Thorn is the one who killed Brody. He's the leader of the Ophidian. We have proof." She held up the letter, her hand trembling. "This letter, it's from Thorn to Samuel. It proves everything." Dobbs hesitated, his gaze flickering from Tally to Jesse, his expression unreadable. He seemed to be weighing his options, calculating the risks. Then he lowered his gun, his face softening slightly. "I know," he said, his voice low and weary. "I know about Thorn. I know about the Ophidian." Tally and Jesse stared at him, their eyes wide with surprise and confusion. How did you know?" Tally asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Maria," Dobbs replied. "She came to me, after the attack on Blackwood's ranch. She told me everything. She told me about Thorn, about the Ophidian, about the shipment." "The shipment," Jesse said, his voice urgent. "What was it? What was Blackwood supplying the Ophidian?" "Weapons," Dobbs replied, his voice grim. "A large shipment of weapons, smuggled in from across the border. Thorn was planning to use them to arm the Ophidian, to launch an attack on Redemption, to seize control of the town." Tally and Jesse exchanged a look of horror. Thorn's ambition was far greater than they had imagined. He wasn't just a corrupt landowner, he was a would-be warlord, a tyrant who sought to rule through fear and violence. "We have to stop him," Tally said, her voice filled with determination. "We have to stop the Ophidian." "We will," Dobbs replied, his voice firm. "But first, we need to get you two to safety." And then, he added, his eyes fixed on Jesse, "We need to talk about what happened at Blackwood's ranch. About Harlan's death." The sun rose fully, painting the sky. They had survived the night, but a day of reckoning was upon them. Chapter 19. A Reckoning Under the Stars. The revelation of Thorn's grand scheme and Dobbs' unexpected alliance shifted the balance of power, turning the tables on their pursuers. But the shadow of Harlan's death hung over Jesse, a potential obstacle to their ultimate goal of clearing Samuel's name and bringing Thorn to justice. Dobbs, true to his word, provided them with medical attention and a safe haven, a small, secluded cabin on the outskirts of town. He listened to their story, to the evidence they had gathered, to the details of their harrowing escape from Blackwood's ranch and Thorn's ambush. Harlan was a dirty cop, Dobbs said, his voice filled with disgust. But he was still a lawman. Killing him, even in self-defense, complicates things, Jesse. I had no choice, Jesse replied, his voice firm. He was going to kill Tally. I did what I had to do. I believe you, Dobbs said, his gaze unwavering. But proving it will be difficult. Thorn will use it against you. He'll paint you as a cold-blooded killer, a fugitive from justice. We need to find that shipment of weapons, Tally said, her voice urgent. That's the key to exposing Thorn, to proving his connection to the Ophidian, to clearing Samuel's name. Maria told me where the shipment was supposed to be delivered, Dobbs said. The old trading post near the border. But it's likely already been moved. Thorn is too smart to leave it there for long. We need to find out where he took it, Jesse said, his mind racing. We need to find a way to track him, to anticipate his next move. They spent the day strategizing, poring over maps, piecing together clues, trying to unravel Thorn's plan. They knew he was planning something big, something that would solidify his control over Redemption and the surrounding territory. But what? And when? As night fell, they decided to take a gamble. They would return to the old trading post, hoping to find some trace of the shipment, some clue that could lead them to Thorn. They rode under the cover of darkness, their senses on high alert, their weapons drawn. They reached the trading post, finding it deserted, just as Dobbs had predicted. But there were signs of recent activity, fresh tracks, discarded crates, the lingering scent of gunpowder. They searched the area, their eyes scanning the ground, their fingers probing every nook and cranny. They found a small, crumpled piece of paper, hidden beneath a loose floorboard. It was a map, a crudely drawn map of the surrounding area. And on the map, marked with a large X, was a location, the abandoned silver mine, just north of Redemption. The mine, Jesse said, his voice filled with a grim satisfaction. That's where he's taken the weapons. That's where he's planning his attack. They knew they had to act quickly. They had to stop Thorn before he could unleash his army of fanatics, before he could plunge Redemption into chaos and bloodshed. They rode to the mine, their hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. They approached cautiously, dismounting a short distance from the entrance, tethering their horses to a clump of trees. The mine was a gaping maw in the mountainside, a dark and forbidding place. They could hear voices, the clang of metal, the sounds of activity coming from within. Thorn was there, and he was preparing for war. They crept towards the entrance, their movements silent and stealthy. They peered inside, seeing a scene of feverish activity. Thorn's men were unloading crates of weapons, stacking them against the walls of the mine, preparing for battle. Thorn himself was there, directing his men, his face illuminated by the flickering light of lanterns. "We need to get inside," Tally whispered. "We need to stop him before it's too late." "But how?" Jesse asked, his voice low and urgent. "We're outnumbered, outgunned. We can't just charge in there." Then, Tally had an idea. A daring, desperate plan, but it was their only chance. "The explosives," she said, her voice filled with a sudden inspiration. "The old mining explosives. They're still stored in the shed near the entrance. If we can set them off, we can collapse the mine, trap Thorn and his men inside." It was a risky proposition, a dangerous gamble. But it was their best chance to stop Thorn, to prevent his attack, to save Redemption. They crept to the shed, finding the explosives, sticks of dynamite, fuses, detonators. They worked quickly, silently, their hands trembling with urgency. They set the charges, carefully placing them at strategic points near the mine entrance. They lit the fuses, the sputtering flames a symbol of their desperate hope, their last stand against Thorn and his evil. They ran, their lungs burning, their legs aching, their hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. They reached a safe distance, just as the first explosion ripped through the night. The ground shook, the air filled with the roar of collapsing rock, the screams of men trapped inside. The mine entrance caved in, burying Thorn and his men under tons of rubble. They watched, their bodies exhausted, their spirits drained, their hearts filled with a mixture of relief and sorrow. They had stopped Thorn, They had prevented his attack. They had saved redemption. But at a terrible cost. As the dust settled and the echoes of the explosion faded, they knew that their journey was far from over. They still had to clear Samuel's name, to bring Thorne's remaining followers to justice, to rebuild their lives. Under a sky full of stars, Tally and Jesse looked at each other. The unforgiving landscape, both external and internal, had tested them to their limits. But they had survived. And they had found, amidst the chaos and violence, a love that was stronger, more resilient than ever before. The reckoning was done. But a new beginning awaited. Chapter 20. The final confrontation of hearts and horizons. The collapse of the mine was a decisive blow against the Ophidian, but it wasn't the end. Thorne's influence ran deep, his followers were scattered throughout redemption, and the threat of retaliation remained. Dobbs, with Jesse and Tally's help, launched a full-scale investigation, rounding up Thorne's known associates, uncovering evidence of their crimes, dismantling their network of corruption. The letter, the damning evidence they had recovered from Samuel's house, proved to be the key to unlocking the entire conspiracy. It implicated not only Thorne but also several prominent figures in redemption, men and women who had secretly supported the Ophidian, profiting from their illegal activities. The town was in an uproar, shocked and betrayed by their revelations. The people of redemption, who had once trusted Thorne, now turned against him, demanding justice, demanding retribution. Samuel, finally exonerated by the evidence, was released from jail, a free man. The reunion between Samuel and Sarah was emotional, a tearful embrace filled with relief, forgiveness, and a renewed sense of hope. But the scars of the past remained, the wounds inflicted by betrayal and violence slow to heal. Samuel struggled to come to terms with his past actions, with the choices he had made, with the consequences he had faced. He was a changed man, marked by his experiences, his spirit wounded but not broken. Jesse, too, faced a reckoning. While his actions in killing Harlan had been deemed self-defense, he still carried the weight of that death, the burden of his past. He had lived a life on the fringes of the law, a life of violence and regret. But he was determined to change, to make amends, to build a new life, a life of peace and purpose. And then there was Tally. She had been the constant, the unwavering force that had held them all together. She had risked her life, her safety, her reputation, to save Samuel, to help Jesse, to expose Thorne. She had shown courage, resilience, and a fierce loyalty that had inspired them all. But the ordeal had taken its toll. She was exhausted, emotionally drained, her spirit weary. She had lost her diner, her livelihood, her home. But she had gained something far more valuable, a renewed sense of self, a strength she hadn't known she possessed, and a love that had been tested and proven true. As the dust settled and redemption began to heal, Jesse and Tally found themselves at a crossroads. They had faced death together. They had fought for justice together. They had found love amidst the chaos. But what now? One evening, as the sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the vast, open landscape, Jesse found Tally sitting on the porch of the small cabin Dobbs had provided them. She was staring out at the horizon, her expression thoughtful, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and hope. He sat beside her, their shoulders touching, their silence comfortable and familiar. He took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers, a silent connection that spoke volumes. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his voice soft. "I'm thinking about everything," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. "About Samuel, about Sarah, about Thorne, about us." "Us," Jesse repeated, the word hanging in the air, heavy with unspoken emotions. "What happens now, Jesse?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Where do we go from here?" He turned to face her, his eyes searching hers, his gaze filled with a love that had been forged in the crucible of hardship and loss. "We build a new life, Tally," he said, his voice firm. "Together. We start over. We find a place, a home, where we can be happy, where we can be free." "But where?" she asked, her voice filled with doubt. Redemption, it holds so many memories, so much pain. We don't have to stay here, Jesse replied. We can go anywhere. We can start fresh, build something new, something that's ours. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the vast, open landscape, the endless horizon. I've been thinking about that ranch, he said, his voice thoughtful. The one Samuel offered me, years ago. It's still there, waiting. We could rebuild it, make it our own. Tally's eyes widened in surprise. Samuel's ranch? She repeated, her voice incredulous. He offered it to me again, Jesse said. He said, he wants me to have it, to start over. He said it's what he always wanted, for both of us. Tally was speechless, her mind reeling. Samuel's ranch. It was a symbol of their past, of their shared history, of the dreams they had once held. But it was also a symbol of hope, of a new beginning, of a future they could build together. She looked at Jesse, her eyes filled with tears, tears of joy, tears of relief, tears of a love that had endured the trials and tribulations of their lives. Yes, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Yes, Jesse. Let's go home. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, they held each other close, their hearts filled with a love that was as vast and enduring as the western sky. They had faced the final confrontation, not just of their enemies, but of their own hearts, their own pasts. And they had emerged victorious, ready to embrace the dawn of a new life, a new beginning, together. The horizon stretched before them, promising not just an end, but a start. Epilogue. Years passed, and the scars of the past, though still visible, faded into the tapestry of a life well lived. The Blackwood Ranch, once a symbol of outlawry and violence, was transformed into a haven of peace and prosperity, a testament to the enduring power of love and redemption. Jesse and Tally rebuilt the ranch, brick by brick, their hands working together, their hearts intertwined. They raised horses, cattle, and a family, their children growing up under the vast, open sky, surrounded by the beauty and the harshness of the western landscape. Samuel and Sarah, their wounds slowly healing, remained close friends, their families intertwined, their bond strengthened by the shared ordeal they had endured. They often visited the ranch, their laughter echoing through the valleys, their children playing together, a testament to the enduring power of forgiveness and reconciliation. Redemption, too, healed and prospered. The shadow of the Ophidian was lifted, the corruption exposed and eradicated. Sheriff Dobbs, a true and honest lawman, kept the peace, ensuring that justice prevailed, that the town remained a safe and welcoming place for all. Maria, who had bravely helped them escape Blackwood's ranch and later testified against Thorne's remaining followers, found a new life for herself, far from the violence and the darkness of her past. She married a young rancher, starting a family of her own, her heart filled with hope and gratitude. Peterson, forever scarred by his experience, eventually found a measure of peace, his trauma slowly receding, replaced by a quiet strength and a renewed appreciation for life. He remained in redemption, a quiet, unassuming figure, a reminder of the darkness they had overcome. And Jesse and Tally, they lived a long and happy life together, their love a beacon of hope, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. They faced challenges, they endured hardships, but they never lost faith in each other, in their love, in their future. They often sat on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sunset, their hands clasped together, their silence filled with unspoken memories, with gratitude, with a deep and abiding love. They had built a life, a home, a family, on the foundations of trust, loyalty, and a love that had been tested and proven true. As the years turned into decades, their hair turned silver, their bodies grew frail, but their love remained as strong and vibrant as the western sky. They had ridden through the storms, faced the demons, and emerged victorious, their love a testament to the enduring power of the human heart. And when their time came, they passed away peacefully, together, their hands still clasped, their souls forever intertwined, their legacy etched in the landscape of the West, a story whispered on the wind, a legend told around campfires, a testament to the enduring power of love, forgiveness, and redemption. They had found their peace, their home, their forever, under the vast, unforgiving, and ultimately beautiful We.